to start and just give a short overview of your experience with the collaborative process and the kinds of issues that you think it is reflective and helpful to.
Mike, first of all, thanks for that kind introduction, and I'm delighted to be here in Wyoming with some old friends like John and Alan and Mike, who were really instrumental in starting the institute, which bears my name at the University of Wyoming. Any one of these gentlemen would be more worthy than me to have that institute named after them. But it, I think, is as good a jumping off point as any to describe what collaborative processes are all about and why universities could be the center for a place like the Institute. As you all know, we've had trouble in this country over the last couple of decades in arriving at decisions. The level of civil discourse, particularly at the national level, has not been very high or very edifying. And it gets in the way, I think, of rational address to our nation's problems. So we can wring our hands about that and say what caused it and what can we do about it and why don't people treat one another better. But it's more helpful, I think, to talk about that kind of problem within the context of a solution to a multi-interest, multi-party kind of problem, which collaborative processes really work very well for. The use of collaboration to make decisions is not a new thing in this country. We had, in Jeffersonian days, barn raising exercises and neighbors helping neighbors solve their own problems, and we were, as a nation, kind of founded on that. But one of the problems that collaborative issues have today is that they compete very strongly for the judiciary, executive, legislative branches of decision making, in which some of this lack of civil discourse, this lack of harmony exists today. And it's sometimes hard for these collaborative processes to break through because they're dealing with dispute resolution institutions that are lodged in our Constitution and enshrined there. And there are automatic sources of funding for these ways of resolving societal disputes. Well, one of the ways of avoiding that is to simply let universities, with their enormous capacity for knowledge, for the generation of knowledge, for the taking that knowledge and applying it to social problems, and provide an arena where people can come together around their problems and sit at the same table and listen to one another. When Alan, it was really Alan's fault that I got involved with the University of Washington. He called me and asked me, Wyoming, sorry. Yeah, right. So, yeah, it wasn't your fault on Washington. And asked me to come and help the university try to sort out what they could do to make a significant impact on natural resource kind of issues. Well, we spent a couple of weekends at it with a very distinguished board, some of whom are here in this audience, to try to figure out what we could do that would be helpful for Wyoming in trying to resolve some of their natural resource disputes. And so what we decided was the university was a very good place to have people gather, to come in Wyoming, almost literally lay their guns down at the door and come in and talk to one another.
Not anymore.
And really listen to one another as they discussed what a problem looked like from their perspective. And collaborative processes give people an opportunity to not only talk to one another in a civil way, but to listen. And once that trust builds up within one of these collaborative processes, so that people begin to talk and listen to one another, real progress starts to be made. And universities are a wonderful place to make that happen. They have research capacities, they have the teaching responsibilities, and they have outreach, particularly land-grant colleges like Wyoming have an obligation to reach out into the community and try to help resolve disputes. All of these things are involved in collaborative processes. The faculty can be made available to help resolve difficult scientific questions. They can use the students and graduate students as helpers in trying to gather information and facts that will inform the discussion. And then they provide this literally an arena where people can come together and talk to one another in a civil way. Out of that, if they're properly structured, if they're properly sponsored by the government, often the governor and legislature, and if the people themselves are desirous of coming to a harmonized solution to their problems, enormous progress can be made. And issues that just seem intractable and have been around for decades can be solved. We have any number of them in the state of Wyoming, as well as other states where institutes like this have been created over the last few decades. So collaborative processes hold great promise, I think, for trying to get at disputes that seem intractable, and at the same time allow us to come to a conclusion that is durable, primarily because while it doesn't satisfy all the people around the table, they know they've had a chance to be heard, they know their interests have been taken into account, and they've figured out how to harmonize their interests with those of the rest of the people at the table. So when you get a solution out of one of these processes, it's a lot more durable than one that you end up with in court or the legislature, where they can be overturned by subsequent proceedings. That's in way too detailed a fashion what you asked.
Al, let me just ask you, because your most recent work on the National Commission for Fiscal Responsibility, which might be viewed as a collaborative process by some, how would you characterize the tenor of the current public debate, and what does it say about the need or the inability to have collaborative processes?
Well, first, let me
turn your microphone on.
I see that, but you followed it up.
Here.
There's a screw loose in the speaker.
Let me work on it, and then
I have it now. I have it.
Al, it's called a switch.
Well, I don't have to take that question. Now, just quickly, I served in the legislature with this delightful man, and he put a bill in to do conservation easements. Let me tell you, that was back in the 70s, and you think that was popular, you're goofy. And we lost that by 1 vote. They thought I was a commie after I finished that. But my training came, I'll answer your question. I was on the Park County Zoning and Planning Commission in the 60s, so I know what hell is from the origins of hell. We were saying, if you want to have a 2-story purple outhouse on your property, by God, it's America. And you will have a 2-story outhouse on you. And I said, well, go ahead, but the neighbors might not go for that. Anyway, I really came out of that one painted red. This guy comes to Washington with a sense of humor in doing the most unbelievable mess of things, and I was on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and all I came away from was admiration for a guy who could take more flack by the ton and keep smiling with a great sense of humor. And this young man was he represented a client who was being seriously abused by the Union Pacific Railroad. And Ed Hirschler, a Democrat, and Hellbaum and myself, with the counsel of this young lawyer, took on the Union Pacific and smashed them flat. Don't forget, the statute books were set up so the Union Pacific could put a depot in your living room because they got 20 miles on each side of the track and interlacking minerals and surface. And they were crowding out the trona industry. And so I've always, I don't know, I'm perverse. It's obvious I am. And
we could agree on that.
I know, but now back to your question. So
stipulated.
The president appointed us as co-chairs. We went to see him. We said, is everything on the table? He said, yes, everything, including your Obamacare. Yep. He took our commission in and told us the same thing. And we came out after 8 months with 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans and 1 independent voting for a package which is tough. and real. And it's about math, and it's not about emotion, and senior citizens and breaking the bedpans in the hospices and cheating the veterans and all this junk that you get out of them. And Social Security, how can we ever change the retirement age to 68 by the year 2050? How will seniors ever be able to? Well, I said they can figure it out somehow. Anyway, I get in a lot of trouble that way. And so for the first 3 months, we didn't even have any trust. I was on the Iraq study group. There was no trust in the beginning. That was Jim Baker and Lee Hamilton. So finally, Erskine and I said, we'll just do a two-person report. We don't care if you join or not. Because all of this stuff, the first few months they say, who's the biggest spending president in the history of the United States before this one? Answer, George W. Bush. Never vetoed a single spending bill in 6.5 years. So that would light up the fire. And then they'd say, but this guy is 3 times worse. TARP, stimulus. I mean, 3 months. And finally we said, we don't give a damn how we got here. It's what do we do now? This trajectory of debt, deficit, interest is on the same course as Portugal, Spain, Ireland, all the rest, except we're bigger. So we began to talk. If you can imagine, there was a congresswoman named Jan Schakowsky from Illinois. Man, oh man, I'm telling you, she's tough. And she just raised hell. But we said, well, then what's your plan? She said, I'll do one. I'll give you a plan. It wasn't something we accepted, but if you're going to be in the game, don't just sit and bitch. Put your plan on the table. Don't just sit and say, compromise is a 4-letter word. In fact, the speaker said, when they asked him about compromise, he said, I don't know that word. And McConnell doesn't know that word, and Harry Reid doesn't know that word, and Pelosi doesn't know that word. But it won't make any difference when the markets pull the chain on us. They don't give a damn who's running the country. They just want their money. And they want more interest for their money when they see a dysfunctional government. So it's sad to watch. It's more bitter than I've ever seen. Breaks your heart. Ted Kennedy and I used to work together on immigration and other issues. I didn't care what he did or how he lived, but he never broke his promise to me, ever. Metzenbaum, tough guy. Never broke his word to me, but we used to just scrap and knock each other around. It was fun. I loved it. Anyway, we're headed for deep stuff, and I don't see any prospect of any kind of cooperation before the election. And between November 6th and December 31st, hang on to your shorts, because it's going to be a bloodbath of $5 to $7 trillion rolling around. If you go too far one way, it's a recession. If you do too little, it's a recession. We'll see what happens. But you got to keep your sense of humor. I try to do that. My mother said humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. And the other one is the definition of politics, and here it is, very short. In politics, there are no right answers, only a continual flow of compromises among groups, resulting in a changing, cloudy, and ambiguous series of public decisions where appetite and ambition compete openly with knowledge and wisdom. Your tears are streaming down your cheeks.
That's too profound for me.
You want me to give you a note? That's enough.
Let me just ask John. You were director of Fish and Wildlife during Spotted Owl and Reintroduction of the Wolf and a number of other issues that you can remember better than I can. Where do you think the collaborative process comes in, and what issues does it particularly lend itself to?
Well, thank you, Mike, and what a pleasure to join you all, these literally 3 giants up here, and I want to thank you all for joining us today, taking part of your time. I am really proud, as hopefully all you who live in Wyoming, of what's going on in Laramie these days, and Dr. Burke and her staff. And the University of Wyoming is really a great university in many respects, and one of them is in the arena of natural resources. Thanks to the gentleman here and many others, what's going on with the Ruckelshaus Institute is really an example of excellence for the Mountain West and for the entire country, how we can come together and build information, find common ground and solutions to some pretty thorny issues. A superb School of Natural Resources, a wonderful conservation corps working across the state, and now the Berry Center on Biodiversity just has great promise for Wyoming and the future of the West. President Bush honored me by asking me to join the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1990, and that was literally the best job in Washington, but I was a foot taller and had hair. I think that's a Simpsonite. But before I got into the Fish and Wildlife Service, mostly because of endangered species and wetlands and a few others, I can recall going to Shirley Basin to reintroduce the black-footed ferret, which they found here in Meeteetse, and the rarest mammal in the world. We were down to 18 animals and decided to roll the dice and look for a place to reintroduce him into Shirley Basin. And the ranchers there on private land agreed to work with us to allow us to reintroduce the black-footed ferret. And I asked one of the ranchers, I remember we were up there to release the first ferrets. There were pickups going everywhere and probably leaving gates open, dust, and biologists setting up all kinds of crap. And I said, why are you letting us do this? You know, here's the rarest endangered mammal on the planet, and you're allowing us to put him right in the middle of your operation. They said, well, gosh, it's a part of Wyoming landscape. It's kind of exciting. He said, just don't tell our friends at the Wyoming stock growers that we're doing this, because the spotted owl and the wolf reintroduction. I might make a few comments on wolf reintroduction, and because Al's here and his memory's pretty ripe on this one. Wolf reintroduction was a national interest course for decades to bring wolves back to the Yellowstone landscape, and myself and a few others had the audacity to think we could come up with a plan which would meet the interests of the western states, the cattlemen, the sportsmen, as well as the national interest. And so working with Alan, and I'm sure he regrets it to this day, and Malcolm Wallop and Conrad Burns and Jim McClure and Larry Craig and some pretty tough hombres, we put together a group, call it a collaborative effort. We had ranchers, we had wool growers, we had local officials, we had people from the game and fish agencies of the 3-state region, we had conservationists, wildlife groups, and we put together a plan and a pledge to Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho that we would reintroduce the wolves, which we did, 31 of them, Yellowstone Park, and also some in Idaho. We made the pledge that the threshold would be 10 breeding pair in each state, 10 breeding units, Idaho, Montana. And once that happened, that we would turn jurisdiction back to the states, and that we would make a compact with the ranchers, the livestock owners, the big game interests, that when wolves misbehaved, they would be managed, but they would be off the list. So it was a successful collaborative effort where the Western congressional delegation said, we're not happy about this, but it sounds like as good a deal, a fair deal for the Western states to be the national interest. And I regret to this day, we have not kept the promise to the people of Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. It's great to have wolves back part of this landscape, but in Wyoming alone, we have almost 30 breeding pair now, 2.5, 3 times the promise. Packs, I think we're close to 50 packs in Wyoming. A lot of people don't want to recognize that government agents have killed 1,700 wolves since they were introduced. Why should the taxpayers be, these conscientious agents, try to take care of problem wolves? So unfortunately, the people that bought into that collaborative effort to get it done was successful, but the final outcome where we have, I'm sure well-intended, but misguiding activists and activist judges which keep moving the moving the goalposts and certain groups that want to litigate and so forth. But I think the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has tried to downlist the wolf since 2002, and of course that's been thwarted in the courts. And we'll try again this fall with a compromise that the federal government, Governor Meade, and others have tried to put together. And I think there's already been court filings. There's already been court filings before Fish and Wildlife Service Interior's even published the rules for this fall hunt. But it's unfortunate we did not keep our pledge to the West, to the Western states. And the people, I got off a plane about a few years ago here in Cody, ran into a very prominent lady here that I won't use her name, prominent, very intelligent businesswoman that I've been friends with. Saw her in the airport, went up to give her a hug. And she was just shaking. She backed away from me. She said, "John, I can never forgive you for what you did." I said, "What? What are we talking about?" He said, "Your reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone." He said, "I love Yellowstone Park. I go there every year with my kids and grandkids. I can never go back to Yellowstone because of what you've done." Now, you can say, well, that's a little unreal, but people around the country, you all do understand the passion of wolves. The years in the legislature, I think Alan would validate, I saw grown men stand up and break into tears on two issues of my 19 years. One, of course, is abortion, and the other one was wolves. So we're not there yet on wolves, and I'm sure Alan probably would have a few comments on that one. The northern spotted owl, probably the biggest endangered species issue that faced the country prior to salmon, Pacific salmon. Involved 3 states, about 12 million acres. We established critical habitat on 7 million. The entire Northwest was fearful people's jobs that just wanted to pay off their mortgage, send their kids to school. I think we found good middle ground on science to try to help the communities thwart the unemployment issues. But spotted owls was another tough one. But we did end up with a lot of collaborative efforts with timber companies, communities, and the 3 states.
Let me just ask the panel, and maybe start with Bill, because you raise an issue that sort of circles around the collaborative process, and that is what kind of natural resources issues in the West are not suitable for the collaborative process?
It's an important, thank you, Mike, for asking that question, because that's an important thing to remember. All issues can't be solved by collaborative processes. They're not suited for it. And all issues for which collaborative processes are suited aren't always solved that way, because all these processes don't work. So sometimes people participate in them and they don't really participate in good faith. They want to blow them up, and if somebody's determined to do that, you can usually blow it up. But the best way from my standpoint to think about areas in which these collaborative processes work well are sort of place-based issues, and that sort of defines a lot of natural resource problems. If, for instance, in a watershed, you have a lot of different claimants for the use of water, ranging from wildlife habitat, fish habitat, to irrigation, to recreation, drinking water supply, the conditions of water quality. Those issues can divide people, and just proper water rights that are so well known in the West as very emotional issues. Those kinds of water-related and watershed place-based kind of problems, if you can get everybody to the table and open their mind and get them willing to talk to one another, it's amazing how much progress can be made. We have a situation in Puget Sound, where I now live, in a watershed, and there are just huge fights over salmon, which are listed as endangered in Puget Sound, and so it involves the problems of habitat, where those fish normally would spawn and breed, and where the smolts would originate. There are huge fights over these questions, and there are 14 major watersheds in Puget Sound And in 3 of them, there have been collaborative processes, one of which have gone over 20 years, where the people are all together. They have managed to sit down and talk through all their desires for uses of the water in that sound. That's where Mount Rainier is located. Fort Lewis is there. There are a lot of small towns. There's an Indian reservation right on the edge of the Nisqually River. That's the river where this collaborative process has been working. All of these people have worked out their interest and have managed to harmonize them. And they got more money. This may not make everybody in Wyoming happy, but they got more money in the stimulus program than all the rest of the watersheds in Puget Sound put together, for 2 reasons. They had a plan that they all agreed to, and they all went forward and tried to raise money on it from first the federal government and any place else they could find it. They have made enormous progress in that watershed. They work out all their problems themselves, and they all think of the watershed as their place. That's where they live, and that's where their children are going to grow up, and they find it enormously rewarding that they have been able to come together. And it was primarily because a farmer who was a leading citizen in that watershed and an Indian chief named Billy Frank shook hands and said, we've got to stop fighting, in fact, stop going to court, stop going to the legislature and trying to get our way, and figure out how to harmonize their interest. And they've done it. And it's a marvelous place to visit, because you know almost the minute you come into that watershed, the people there are all on the same page, pulling in the same direction.
Al, John, do you have any thoughts about, in your experience, what types of issues in the West haven't been capable of resolution?
Well, that's a good question. I think
solved.
it isn't going to work if key players won't sit at the table. They figure there's either they can thwart something that they want thwarted in their own means, or the objectives they think they can get in another arena. Or I think there's some issues just that are overripe. They've been worked so much, and people have beaten the tar out of each other so long, and it's been in the paper so long that trying to find common ground might be difficult.
I think I'm correct that Montana has not yet done a wilderness bill, nor Idaho, but Wyoming did. And Herschler was governor. Malcolm and I and Dick Cheney were in the Senate, or in the House and Senate. And John Seiberling was the chair of the House committee, and he had a staff member that wanted to rise every morning at face the east and to transform himself into some kind of Zeus or something. I never did figure out what the hell the guy was doing, but he wanted to set the whole state of Wyoming into wilderness. So we put in a bill to make the city park in Cleveland a wilderness, and Seiberling then came over and visited, and we began to talk. And then the enviros came, and there was never enough. Well, we need another 285,000 acres, or we need so finally Malcolm and I and Herschler and Dick got a big map, and we said, bring us a Crayola, big old black Crayola. And we said, how many more acres do you want? I mean, because you're not getting out of this room and playing this game where you get it and then you go and get it again, then you go to court. So they said, well, we need 100 and whatever it was. And so Herschler looked at it and he said, well, we need something down there in southwest around there, Fontenelle. And he drew a little picture and had acres in it. Cheney said, well, back there behind Haugadon up in there, we like that up there. That'll look good there. Malcolm said, oh, I've been waiting for that around Cloud Peak. We'll just, hell, I said, well, Bobcat Creek, will you run something back over the ridge there? And we did. And they said, well, we said, isn't that the acreage you wanted? Well, yeah, but we have to talk with our people. We said, no, this is it. You've been hanging around like poor relatives, and now that's it. And so we sent it up to the president, and it's to show how intractable it is. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Steve Sims and Church even tried to do it. Conrad and Baucus tried to do it. In other words, efforts between Democrats and Republicans always cremated by these groups that are demanding more and more and more. It's unbelievable. So I think I'm correct. Maybe someone can correct me, but I don't think either of those two states, and don't forget, Wyoming, leaving off Alaska, the lower 48, Wyoming provides 44% of the nation's wilderness. It's like I said, we gave at the office.
Well, one of the, I think what you're saying is that there are issues where, because of the demands of one group or another, you can never reach the harmony that Bill talks about. One of the questions occurred to me today was, and I think it may be why we can't go anywhere on health care nationwide, without regard to the current yes or no politics on that. But has it been your experience that when you have an issue, that there's a large group that wants status quo?
Well, then they're not going to negotiate in good faith. I mean, one of the things you have to do before you, Alan's decision is example is this place-based example, except the space was unlimited. There was no definition of the
no
space.
Watershed.
No watershed, no place that they could identify with as their place. And so it is important to be able to put some boundaries around what you're discussing in order for these collaborative processes to work. I have believed for years, in fact, we suggested this to the Congress on environmental issues, that they should try to get before introducing a bill, a member of a committee should try to get the relevant players around the table and say, okay, we're going to work this out, much the way Alan just described the wilderness situation. And here are the criteria we're going to use, and we need an agreement. And if we don't get an agreement out of all of you that will be balanced because of the balanced group, we're going to go ahead anyway. So it forces a decision within a certain period of time. It's a form of collaborative process. There's more force associated with the implementation of the decision of the process itself than is normal. But if you don't have everybody playing, and if somebody says the status quo is fine, then they're not a player. And before you start one of these processes, what you have to do, whether it's the University of Wyoming or Washington or any other university or any place where this is going to happen, you have to do an assessment. You have to go out and talk to all of the people that are going to be involved and say, are you willing to play? Are you willing to try as best you can to harmonize your interests with that of others at the table? And if they say, no, I can get a better deal in the legislature or in the courts, or status quo is fine with me, then you don't have the requisite agreement to try to work things out with the proper group.
Think of it this way: you've got the situation now where 83 guys in the House and gals, they didn't go there to limit government; they went to stop government. Well, how the hell do you start anything when you got 83 people rock bound that want to stop government? Merry Christmas.
John?
I think the idea of ripeness is there's some merit to it. I recall in the legislature, Alan mentioned the open space easement, give landowners another tool, an option with their property rights. When we put that in, it was the agriculture interests and a few others that helped do us in, and then we came up with an idea called the Wildlife Trust Fund that the two of you will remember, where we were going to take mineral proceeds, create a fund of $250 million to compensate Wyoming ranchers to keep the land in private property, but to provide easements. Again, it was the ag interests, and we've talked a lot about it recently with some of their leaders about how they helped do that, and we lost it by one vote in 2 sessions. Wyoming, in my opinion, has an opportunity that no other state has to protect its wildlife resources, its open space, its critical watersheds, its tradition of agriculture in a way that no other state can, because most states have screwed it up and lost it, and they're spending billions to protect remnants, where Wyoming could really mold their landscapes in partnership with the landowners. Well, now that has all changed. The Wyoming landowners all over the state are forming partnerships with nonprofit groups, with the Wyoming Trust Fund, which is now in place, the NRCS, the University of Wyoming, it's provided data and background. And I think the Wyoming Stockgrowers Agricultural Land Trust has now protected 170,000 acres across Wyoming on a volunteer basis. They're now the 9th largest land trust in the United States, or 1,700 of them. Just down here at Meeteetse, the Epperson family at the Hat-2 Ranch protected a huge 13,000 acre easement, provided liquidity and cash for future generation to help that family keep ranching. Down at the Bud Ranch in Sublette County.
In order to achieve a greater approximation toward whatever principle you're trying to preserve, it may be necessary to compromise to get there. And it is clearly true when these collaborative processes work, it's because leaders among the various interest groups that are being represented at the table come forward and exercise leadership. One of the things they have to do is go back and talk to the people, if they're representing environmental groups or ranchers or whoever it is that's part of their contingent. They can't just go in there and represent themselves. They have to go back and talk to their groups, say, here's where we are, what do you think? And then exercise some persuasiveness and leadership among their own groups to get them to move forward toward a compromise that will give most people most of what they want. If somebody comes out with everything they want, then probably somebody else has got nothing. So you're going to need to have a willingness to compromise when those groups come together, but the leaders have to usually emerge during the discussion of the collaboration itself. And it's not somebody running for president often, it's somebody who's a very unlikely leader. They just happen to be someone with an interest that they have been imaginative enough to figure out how they can harmonize with somebody else's interest.
I think a remarkable thing is the existence of this thing for 18 years. There were people of all stripes who were terribly, terribly concerned about hearing about this operation starting up. You remember that? I do. Big time. Well, and it came from it. I wouldn't even name one. All of them were concerned. Like, what are they going to do? They're going to mess around, and they're going to get into land use again. They're going to get into this and water use and all the things that create high passion in Wyoming. It was so bad that a member of, I think they had an oversight outfit in the legislature. Our budget was $5 million out of, I don't know what the hell it was, $1.5 billion or whatever, and wanted an investigation of this group and put it in the law. Now, that's how fun and games this was when it started, and it's been there for 18 years. Let me tell you, I dealt with people like Robert Byrd, George Mitchell, Al Cranston, Democrats of the first order, and George Mitchell, you remember, Bill, got us all in a room, Democrats and Republicans. He said, we're going to do a Clean Air Act, and we're going to do that and get a conference. And he brought in everybody, one after the other. Great patience, takes tremendous patience. I do not have that, never have had. Will eventually get my foot in it without question, but I'll stick around. I've never given anybody the ice treatment. That's the worst thing of all time. You give the other side the ice treatment. I'm not talking to you. It's a good way to destroy marriages. It's a good way to destroy anything. It destroys nations. I used to say to Cheney, why the hell don't you talk to North Korea and Iran? Well, we don't talk to our enemies. I said, we won't have anybody left. And then Dick is a chum of the ages. He's just one of the dearest guys I have, who they then chose to demonize him, sadly enough, because he's a great one. And that's my personal opinion. But nevertheless, madness. To see the came out of that hearing one night, or the conference, and there were a bunch of guys, all environmentalists, sitting around, looked like they were sitting around the fire, if there'd been a fire. And I said, what are you guys doing out here? Well, we're figuring out how to beat Chafee and Mitchell in the next election. I said, you people are stupid. If you didn't have Mitchell and Chafee, a Democrat and Republican, to do the thoughtful, patient work, you're going to get something rammed into you that you won't even know what it looks like. I mean, and this delisting issue, I have a word for those people out there. Keep your word. I voted for the delist. I voted for the grizzlies, and I voted for the wolves on the basis that when that population of grizzlies reached 664, that would be it, and you'd go into another plan. The minute it hit there, they went to court. That second. I don't like that at all. It's called lying. And then the other one was, you get to a certain breeding pair of wolves and this, and we'll say that's it. The principal prey base of wolves is an ungulate, and they'll eat 60 ungulates a year, a breeding pair. Well, how many breeding pairs? And I listened to all that, and I bought that. Now, here we go. The minute that hits, I talked to Malloy, met him at the airport. I said, you're as ornery as I am, the judge. He said, I know, but I'm ornery on both sides. And he is, and that's good. But nevertheless, keep your word. You can't have anything collaborative or honest or anything unless you keep your word. And I don't like people who don't keep their word, and I can identify their organizations. I'll still go talk to them, but I'll ram it right in their nose, too.
That's something about the gazoo.
Mike, let me make one point, because Alan mentioned there was some concern when the University of Wyoming started this effort to encourage collaboration in the state to resolve some of these issues. The university's role is not to solve the problem. The university's role is to create a center where people can come and resolve their own differences. They can provide facilitation, they can provide knowledge, they can provide scientific information that will help inform the discussion. But the university itself is not using them as a center for helping and facilitating collaboration. Doesn't solve the problem. I mean, if the university comes down on one side or another on one of these issues officially as a university, they get into a huge, big controversy and become less successful as a university itself. But as a neutral forum where people can come together and resolve their own disputes, and then the university steps back out of it, they perform a very useful function for the state.
John, you were in the legislature, you were oftentimes apart from not only your constituents, but some of your colleagues in the legislature, advancing things like conservation easements.
There's one that's overriding everything, and that's the question of climate change, and that is not subject to collaboration. It's a global issue. I mean, you're just kidding yourself if you think you can get everybody to sit down and work that out. I mentioned to you before we're starting here that I'm currently involved in an ocean acidification panel in the state of Washington, which is to make recommendations the 1st of October. And the problem is that as carbon is absorbed by the ocean, since the Industrial Revolution, really, it's been building up, and it's about 30% higher today, the carbon content of the ocean, than it was when the Industrial Revolution started. We thought this was a great thing because it was absorbing a lot of the carbon that was being generated by burning fossil fuels. Now, we see that it's causing shellfish to have difficulty forming shells, so that we've got oysters it's about a $175 million industry in Puget Sound. A good number of those oysters have been unable to form shells for the last 5.5 years. The native oysters grown in hatcheries are doing just fine because they can filter the water and they can they can provide more alkalinity for it. But I mean, that's just another aspect of the same problem. It's the carbon coming into the atmosphere. What can you do about it? And it's, our panel's supposed to make recommendations in about 60 days, and it's not clear what you can do about it. You certainly can't do anything about the global problem in one state, but it is a huge problem and something we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with through some combination of programs. There's no one magic bullet to it by any means, but we haven't yet gotten ourselves in a position to come to grips with this issue yet. It's just going to really be coming at us like a freight train the longer we live.
John?
Well, I think many of the issues we deal with today are going to continue, whether it's wildlife, endangered species, wetlands, noxious, exotic species. I think two others that will impact the West certainly may not be in the realm of what Bill said on climate change, but it'll be water. The fights over water here in the West, as the West and Southwest face pretty severe droughts. It's how our water comes off in the spring, and ranchers versus fish versus cities, and it'll be Wyoming against the downstream states. And the second issue might be sustainability. All of us in our personal lives, our business lives, our communities, how are we utilizing resources? How much waste are we generating? How do we use energy? How do we use water? Are we good stewards of the resources that this country's been blessed with? And under the rubric of sustainability, certainly out around the world, the access to fresh water is, 2 billion people don't have access to fresh water. A child dies every 15, 20 seconds from a waterborne disease. I think we have to be conscious of this. 2 billion people don't have access to just basic energy. You're not going to have environmental protection or education or good health care or economic development jobs if you don't have access to basic energy. That confronts a lot of the issues on climate change. And so I think those are some of the issues that are going to whirl around the days ahead.
Al?
I think, Mike, that climate change is real. What's causing it, I share some thoughts, but it's there. Let's just say it's there. To deal with it, I don't know how you would do it. And another one will be, in this part of the world, fracking. Fracking with regard to the oil and gas industry is going to be a big time mess around for sure. View sheds, look at today. We don't even, as far as I know, we don't even have a fire in Wyoming, but we're getting the whole load from Idaho and Montana, and it's very limited. It's kind of sad, but that's the way that is. The other one is the ancient stuff of water, riparian versus appropriations. Those are real things. Air quality, quality of life, population. I was thinking we got it figured out that your population has doubled since the beginning of mankind, and ready to, in 2056, go look at those figures. How many footprints will fit on the face of the earth? But you don't hear some of the groups talking about that. That's critical because, some civilizations have disappeared because they ate the last animal and took the last stick of wood and used the last resource, and they're gone. Don't know why they're gone, but they're gone. So those are issues that don't get dealt with, because then you're into religion, and you're into this, and you're into that, and everything gets all shaded into four things that I found in my public life: emotion, fear, guilt, and racism. And you either pass or kill or support or get rid of something using a deft blend of emotion, fear, guilt, or racism. It's a hell of a fun place to work.
Alan,
Great place to live, too.
Raised one other issue that we've got. It's sort of a context issue we have to think about. I was born in 1932, and when I was born, we had a little over 2 billion people on Earth. Last summer, we announced we have over 7 billion people on Earth.
When you have the federal government owning more than half the land or half the land and more than half the minerals, how do you effectively get the federal government into collaborative processes? Come on, jump on that.
The answer is leadership. It really is. There's no reason people running the federal agencies that have so much impact on the land in the West not to be collaborative, not to include the people that are going to be impacted by whatever decisions they make or whatever changes they make. You've got to do that in order to get the people who are affected to support whatever decision you make. And if you're not any good at that, you're not any good at leadership. And it seems to me it's absolutely necessary that part of federal officials' responsibilities are seen as both listening hard to what people say are their interest, their vital interest, and bring those along in whatever decision is being made so that it has a chance of being durable.
John?
I think sometimes those in the western states get a little bit of an inferiority complex. We do too much whining. It seems like that's always good politics. And yet I think with the right kind of leadership from the governor's office, the delegation, and having once been a federal bureaucrat in a federal agency, I think those agencies, for the most part, have some very good people. And if we don't start by beating the tar out of them, but working with regional directors, working with secretaries on Western issues. Now, some of those are going to be fraught with, there's no way we're going to get an adequate solution, but I think there's a lot of examples where the people in the West, under your leadership and others, and today with Matt Mead and the right kind of delegation, bringing in the right kind of people with our congressional delegation and so forth, I see a lot of promise in the Western states coming together and finding solutions. I see where Governor Mead now heads up an 8-state effort on sage grouse, which is one of those hammers hanging over the Western states. And I think it's an opportunity where the states can come up with a toolkit, a plan, a strategy that it'll be way out ahead of what the feds are looking at, and thus get a lot of diverse groups in behind it. So I think that there's real opportunity if the Western states would whine a little bit less and thoughtfully approach our federal agencies and take partners with them, the private sector and reasonable nonprofit groups. I do feel there's more middle ground than sometimes we admit.
Thank you. Let me just say that your comment about the sage grouse, it seems to me that is an issue that has lent itself to collaborative processes, both state and federal, and it's partly because there's such a big hammer hanging over it.
Well, I sense that there's more listening and more transparency, and every one of those laws that we worked with when the federal government was doing something, that's our landlord, was doing something to the tenants, there was a way for the tenants to speak, and I think they're listening. I see that in the Shoshone Forest with things of recent vintage. I see that with Yellowstone Park. We had those hearings in Wyoming and Cody. And I think what's happening when you have one of those meetings and the nut job gets up and starts frothing at the mouth, the people sit for a while and then they say, why don't you shut up so that we can get on with the discussion here? That I think is happening, and that I think is very good. The listening takes place, and they all have a process of participation, and I think there's more listening going on with what is local, of course, snowmobiling in Yellowstone Park and Sullivan Pass and ice climbing. There's more listening, and I think that's good.
Good. On that positive note, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience.